Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm coming through to you. This is Royal Alexander, and we are on our 10th, unless I miscounted, our 10th session of Constitutional Revival with Royal Alexander. I want to thank all of you for being a part of this, for the contributions you've made, which have allowed us to stay on the air. We are fine for now. I will tell you if we run short again, but we are fine for now. I again thank Joanne Woodard and David Hagar, without whom this whole program would never have taken off. David Hagar's company is called Beyond Innovative Technologies and Consulting, and he does a great job for us. Anyone who wishes to review the material that we have already covered can do so by going to my YouTube channel, Constitutional Revival with Royal Alexander, and review and catch up anything that maybe you have missed. And if you ever want to email me a question, you can at constitution.royalalexander@gmail.com. Again, constitution.royalalexander@gmail.com. There is so much going on. And tonight, I do intend to do the 9th, 10th, and 11th Amendments, but I have got to talk about what is going on. You remember at the beginning of this course, I told y'all, people tend to think of the Constitution as kind of some old document sitting on a shelf somewhere that doesn't really have any relevance to today's life, to American life in 2020. Well, let me tell you, it has more relevance than you can possibly imagine. We know that, but many Americans are seeing that, given what is going on in this country right now regarding this presidential election. And there's a few things I want to say about that. First of all, let me just get one thing out of the way that I find irritating. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to know that an affidavit is a sworn testimony, and affidavits are evidence. Absolutely, affidavits are evidence. In fact, if someone knowingly signs an affidavit that they know contains false information, they can be subjecting themselves to criminal penalties. Affidavits are absolutely evidence. So when the national media says the Trump campaign keeps making all these allegations, but they haven't provided any evidence, I want you to know that's completely false. Hundreds of affidavits have been submitted reflecting thousands of instances of alleged voter fraud. Hundreds of affidavits so far. It was 500 by the end of last week. It could be over 500 affidavits now, reflecting thousands of instances of voter fraud in all these states, a bunch of states. Secondly, this Dominion computer system deal, it is the most corrupt thing. The whole reason that Dominion software exists is to switch votes. They can watch voting in real time and switch them. The more that comes out, I'm a Trump supporter, and I know sometimes my feelings get wrapped up in this, but I'm telling you, even an objective observer would have to say what we are seeing smells very badly. It doesn't pass the smell test. Okay, that's my first pet peeve. Affidavits. Affidavits are evidence, and there's hundreds of them, and before soon there'll probably be 1,000 affidavits, and they're evidence. So the Trump campaign has presented evidence. Number two, every time Joe Biden goes out there and stands in front of the office of the president-elect, I want you to laugh like I laugh every time I see him. I'm sure most of the time he doesn't realize where he is anyway, but there's no such thing as the office of president-elect. No such thing. They completely have fabricated that to give the appearance that it's all a done deal, a fait accompli, that it's finished. He's the president, going to be. It's not, and he's not, at least not yet. I want you to know that it's not over till the Supreme Court says it's over, either by taking a case and ruling for or against one side or the other, applying constitutional law, or by not taking the case at all. If they don't take the case at all, then Biden, who has been falsely declared the president-elect, will then likely become truthfully the president-elect. but the certifying of ballots doesn't take place until December 14th. And I want to talk to you about a couple of dates. Of course, November 3rd is election day, but we know we're not really voting for a particular person for president. We're voting for a slate of electors because we use the Electoral College. So the slate of electors are pledged to support one of the candidates in a later vote. And in most cases, in most states, the candidate who gets most of the popular votes wins those electoral votes. But that doesn't happen. Well, that's November 3rd. But we haven't even moved past November the 3rd because there's multiple lawsuits that have been filed, and I cannot believe the Supreme Court will not hear any of it. Maybe it will hear the Pennsylvania one. It almost heard the Pennsylvania one before the election. But keep in mind, after Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, it was 4-4. There were only 8 members of the U.S. Supreme Court. 4 voted not to hear the case, and 4 voted to hear the case. In that group were Alito, Clarence Thomas, Kavanaugh, and Gorsuch. John Roberts, unsurprisingly, joined the liberals to decide not to hear. But Alito wrote in very strong language that this court may end up regretting not addressing this problem before the election in Pennsylvania. Why? Because the power to determine state voting laws, the power to determine the electoral process in a state belongs to the legislature, not to the Supreme Court. So when the Pennsylvania Supreme Court added extra days to the voting timeline of Pennsylvania votes, it did something it didn't have the power to do. And that is a clear, straight violation of Pennsylvania law. And so the Supreme Court has a right and can reach down, because that petition never got heard. So it didn't go away. It didn't get accepted or rejected. It just sat there 4-4, never went anywhere. So that petition is already before the Supreme Court in that Pennsylvania case. So the justices could take that up. But there are multiple other cases. The justices also have to decide whether to allow the Trump campaign to intervene in that Pennsylvania lawsuit. And I think it will allow the Trump campaign, because there are certain things to allow an intervention. One, that the party who wants to intervene have a concrete, particularized interest or harm that it could suffer if it was not allowed to join the lawsuit, not allowed to join the case. So I think the Trump Campaign, Inc. will be allowed to intervene. But all that's to be determined. In the meantime, though, I'm going to talk about some dates in a minute beyond November 3rd. I don't know how many of you heard now 2 times Sidney Powell. Sidney Powell is a big-time criminal defense attorney. She has represented a number of major criminal defendants, including currently General Michael Flynn, who is continuing to be abused to no end. There's going to be books about how General Michael Flynn has been treated, how long that federal district judge in D.C. has held on to his case, why the D.C. Circuit has done nothing about it, even though the prosecutor decided not to press charges months ago. Anyway, Sidney Powell has represented him in that case. She's now a part of the campaign, the Trump campaign. She has given 2 interviews, one last Thursday on Lou Dobbs and another one over the weekend. And if my days are wrong, just know that these were the interviews. One with Maria Bartiromo on American Futures, I think it's called. But you know Maria Bartiromo, she covers the stock market and a number of other things. Sidney Powell was interviewed on Lou Dobbs and on Maria's show. In both places, she used some of the strongest language that you can use. And again, she's not a politician. She doesn't live in the political world. She lives in the world of real evidence, not, oh, you hurt my feelings. No. Sidney Powell lives in the world of, if you can't prove it, I'm pouring your case out and your client's going to jail. That's the world Sidney Powell lives in. On Lou Dobbs and on Maria Bartiromo, she has made powerful statements, including that she cannot believe what she is seeing, that the affidavits are coming in faster than they can process them. I told you there's already 500. Affidavits are coming in faster than they can process them, and that this Dominion computer software system it's a scandal in and of itself. It ought to result, she says, and this is a woman who deals every day in defending major criminal felonies. She says a major criminal investigation should be begun against this Dominion computer software. It's in 30 or more American states, 30 or more. It does nothing. It was created to do nothing but cheat, but steal, and real time change votes. I think Dominion alone makes this thing impossible for the Supreme Court not to hear. They set out to steal it. And again, you can say, Royal, you're just a partisan. Well, yeah, I'm a Trump supporter, no doubt about it, because I'm a supporter of the Constitution. I'm a constitutional conservative. That's right. So who's the candidate that's closest to my position? Unquestionably, it's Donald Trump. But you don't have to feel as strongly as I do about issues to look and see, wait a minute. We all know, you know the expression, I just want to have my day in court. We all have lost at things, games, maybe in court, something we put our heart into, and it's disappointing, and sometimes it a little bit breaks our heart, but we get over it if we know the game was conducted fairly and squarely. We knew what the rules were, and they were applied, and we just lost. We can live with that. We'd be disappointed. We'd still worry about the future of our country, but we could live with it. But brother, if they come and steal it, we're not living with anything. We're never accepting that, because the damage Joe Biden, and it's not even going to be Joe Biden, and I don't have anything against him personally. I was around him a number of times in those years I was in DC when he was a senator. He's just kind of like a flake, just kind of wanders by. He was a senator from Delaware all those years. They tell him when you go on the floor of the Senate or the floor in the House, this is a yes vote for Democrats or a no vote for Democrats, yes vote for Republican, no vote for Republican. He just would vote that way. Certainly not some intellectual luminary. But we're not even talking about Joe Biden with his full capacity. He's going to be used by the powers around him, probably starting with Kamala Harris. So I don't have anything against Joe Biden, but he's not a legitimate president. As things stand now, no one is going to accept him as a legitimate president. He will have essentially lamed up his presidency. He will have delegitimized his presidency from the very beginning if this stands. We're not crazy. 20 people are the most he would ever have at a rally. And with President Trump toward the end, they were having 50 and 60,000 people show up. You can't, those are spontaneous eruptions of enthusiasm and support. When we couldn't get together, people get on the lakes. You saw all those boats on the lakes. People would get in their cars and ride around town. You saw the hundreds of thousands of people who packed into DC this weekend. All of that is spontaneous. Spontaneity derives from raw, genuine enthusiasm. You don't hire people to come drive over from the next state and pay them to do that all day. No one's enthused. On the other hand, if someone is enthused, you don't need to pay them. You don't need to do anything. Just get out of their way, because they're going to find a way to get with all the other people who feel that way and go make a statement with flags and speeches. All of that. You're telling me Joe Biden got more votes than Barack Obama. You know that expression, at a certain point, it strains credulity. It becomes incredulous. When something strains credulity, maybe one thing, yeah, kind of, maybe, I'm not sure. Maybe that, well, another mistake, human error, there's never been a perfect. But when there's thousands of instances that have been alleged, and there are, you begin to think, no, this looks like an organized effort to steal this election. Again, Dominion, the Dominion software was created for nothing but to steal votes. So all of that is ginning up right now, but I want you to push back when you hear someone say, the Trump campaign, he's boasting or does what he always does. There's no evidence. Please tell them, yes, there's evidence. There's already hundreds of affidavits reflecting thousands of instances of fraud that have been put forward. You heard Sidney Powell say, a woman who knows what her words mean. I mean, she will have permanently damaged her reputation if all she's doing is making rhetorical statements. But I don't think she is, because she is, as I said, a big-time criminal defense attorney where everything is precise. And she's the one who said she's going to release the Kraken. I hope so, because millions of us have been praying that the truth will come out. We're the ones who love America. We're the ones who play by the rules. We're the ones who would lose fairly and squarely if we lose fairly and squarely, which so far we have not. So don't let anybody tell you it's over, because it's not over till the Supreme Court says it is. Okay, I needed to say that to you because I want that to be on your minds. If I think of anything else that I've been wanting to say to you all week, I'm going to tell you, but don't let them tell you there's no affidavits, and go and watch Sidney Powell on either Maria Bartiromo or Lou Dobbs. She makes unusually strong statements. She makes unnecessarily strong statements. She could have made her point, and she never backs off. And in her closing statement, she doubles down. So I have faith in her because she's not a politician. She's not in politics. She's in criminal defense, where everything, proof beyond a reasonable doubt. We've talked about that. She knows what a hairline trigger is. She knows what the preponderance of evidence is. She knows what proof beyond a reasonable doubt is. For her to make the statement she did gives me hope, because she's not out there. And I trust Kayleigh McEnany, but Kayleigh McEnany is representing the White House. This lady has been hired at no small amount, Sidney Powell, for her legal acumen and skill. And for her to make those statements means something to me. So in the meantime, let's keep praying, keep defending this process. Nothing has been decided. Every time Joe Biden goes out there in front of the office of the president-elect, you need to laugh to yourself like I do. By the way, the General Services Administration, it's called the GSA, which controls federal funds over all federal properties, and the funding of them, the building of them. It's kind of like does maintenance for all federal property. The GSA has not released federal funds to the Biden transition. Why? Because there's no ascertainable winner yet. Nothing's been certified. Okay? So when people keep trying to rush this through, it's because they know they're stealing it. That's why they're trying to rush. If they knew they'd won it fair and square, why would they be in such a panic to get it through, get it over? Because they know they didn't win it fair and square. They know they had an elaborate plan to steal it. And that plan each day is being more and more uncovered. So keep pushing back. In Bush v. Gore in 2000, 37 days went on. We're only at about 10 days now since the election. So we barely started. Don't let people push us into anything. Stand and defend it. Nothing is over till the Supreme Court says it is, and you push back with these facts I've shared with you. There's a ton of affidavit evidence, and I think there's going to be a lot more other kinds of evidence, circumstantial, direct, but right now there's a ton of affidavit evidence. So November 3rd is the first day. By late November or early December, each state has its own deadline to certify the election. However, if there's ballot disputes, litigation, or other factors that delay the count in a state, blowing this deadline, going past the late November, early December deadline, doesn't invoke a penalty in the presidential race, because the big deadlines are set to come. But that late November, early December, states are supposed to have a real picture of what they're going to do. But if they don't, it's not fatal yet. Now, December 8th that's a real deadline. December 8th is what's known as the safe harbor deadline. This means that Congress not challenge any electors named by this date in accordance with state law. So why they call it the safe harbor. As long as electors are certified by December the 8th, Congress doesn't even have the right to challenge them. Congress probably wouldn't challenge them even later than this, but they don't even have the right to if they're in by December 8th. That's why it's called the safe harbor. But by December 14th, that is a critical date. That's the date when electors are required to meet in their states and cast their ballots for president, December 14th. That's the date it falls on this election. Missing this deadline could mean a state's electors don't count in the presidential tally. Any electors, however, seated between December 8th and December 14th can still vote, but they could theoretically be challenged by Congress. If they're all certified by December the 8th, Congress doesn't even have the right to challenge. If they're certified between December 8th and December 14th, Congress theoretically could challenge the electors in a state if it wanted to. It probably won't, but it could. So if you know, then get it done by December 8th. You don't even give Congress an option then. But December 14th is the date. The 14th is also the date that the governors of each state must certify the state's presidential election and its slate of electors. Keep in mind, when many of us here in Louisiana went and voted for President Trump, or those who voted for Joe Biden, we weren't voting for President Trump or for Joe Biden specifically. We're voting for the slate of electors pledged to each candidate. There's a slate of electors pledged to President Trump, and there's a slate of electors pledged to Joe Biden. Whoever wins Louisiana gets those votes. If President Trump won it by a large margin, Louisiana has 8 electoral votes. Remember we talked about that before? It's based on your representation in Congress. Every state has 2 because of our 2 senators. Every state has 2 senators, which makes a tiny little state like Maine just as powerful as a huge state like California. They both have 2 United States senators. Now, that's in the U.S. Senate. In the House of Representatives, we base representation on population. That's why California has 55, or maybe it's 57 members of the U.S. House, and Maine, I think, just has 1. Because in the U.S. House, we do base it on population. So a tiny state like Maine or Wisconsin, Wyoming, a tiny state like Maine or Wyoming has 1. If I'm wrong about Maine, I apologize, but it's tiny. I think it only has 1, maybe 2, but let's assume it's 1. Wyoming definitely only has 1. California has 57, but that's in the U.S. House. In the U.S. Senate, it doesn't matter how big your state is. Each state gets 2 senators. So Louisiana, in the Electoral College, Louisiana has 8 electoral votes. Our 2 senators, John Kennedy and Bill Cassidy, and we have 6 members of the House. And I hope our state doesn't keep shrinking from out-migration because of our state economy, because we're slowly killing oil and gas, because we make it hard for people to be in business here, all those things. But we can reverse that. And I'm always hopeful. But hopefully we won't lose any more people. Right now, we have 6 members of the U.S. House of Representatives. They are, of course, Congressman Mike Johnson, Ralph Abraham, who didn't run for re-election, and there's a race on for his seat. That's the Monroe seat, so we'll say that's number 2. Number 3 is Clay Higgins in Lafayette. Number 4 is Garrett Graves in Baton Rouge. Number 5 is Steve Scalise, the majority whip in St. Tammany, Jefferson and St. Tammany. That's the big part of it. And then in New Orleans, Cedric Washington. Those are our 6 members of the U.S. House and our 2 senators. 6 and 2 is 8. So if our stuff is clear, there's no litigation going on here about the presidential election. By December the 8th, probably Governor John Bel Edwards will certify to the Congress, transmit it to the U.S. Senate. That's who it has to be transmitted to. That Louisiana's 8 electoral votes are going to President Trump. It has to be done no later than the 14th. When all that's done, December, if they haven't already done it, December 23rd, the states are supposed to transmit their votes to Congress. If they haven't done it before then, but they're supposed to have done it before then, but that's the latest. So December 8th, December 14th, and December 23rd. But December 14th is the big date. Now, January 3rd. The new Congress is sworn in on January 3rd. Now, that's another thing. I know I'm doing some tangents tonight, but these tangents I think are important. It's going to be the new Congress that decides who the president is if this election gets thrown into the U.S. House of Representatives. Meaning, there's several states that have Republican legislatures. It's those legislatures that are going to have to certify the electoral votes from each of their states. In some of these states that have Republican legislatures, some of those legislatures are not going to want to certify those ballots for Joe Biden if they think the election was stolen in their state. So let's assume they don't transmit those votes. Well, if either candidate does not get 270, that's the magic number. Either Biden or President Trump has to get 270 electoral votes. If either of them does not get to 270, and it may be just because several states simply do not send their votes, electoral votes, no one can make them. That's what the Constitution leaves that to the legislatures in the states. If they don't send them and Joe Biden doesn't get to 270, this election is going into the House of Representatives. Now, let me tell you what that means. It means not what you think it means. It doesn't mean that because the Democrats are the majority in the U.S. House of Representatives that Joe Biden wins. It doesn't mean that at all. If this election is thrown into the U.S. House of Representatives, each state gets one vote of the 50. One. Big California only gets one vote. Little Maine only gets one vote. Small Louisiana only gets one vote. But right now, 26 states are dominated by the Republican Party. And keep in mind, Nancy Pelosi is heavily being criticized for how badly Democrats did in the U.S. House. A number of seats they were supposed to win, they lost, and Republicans won those seats. The separation in the U.S. House of Representatives right now is much smaller than before this election. I think it's 8. Somebody correct me because several of these are still being disputed. But I think only 8 seats separate the Democrats and the Republicans right now. 8. Well, it used to be like 20, and they were supposed to add a bunch of Democrat seats. They didn't. So I want you to know that before the election, the old Congress, the legislatures in 26 states were dominated by Republicans. Now, because Republicans did so well, I think, and again, it's the new Congress that's going to decide, not the one right now. The new one that's sworn in on January 3rd is what's going to decide this election if it gets thrown into the U.S. House of Representatives. Okay, that's important. So even though it's important that you know that 26 states are GOP controlled now. Right now, President Trump would win, unless could be greater, but at least he would win 26-24. There's a chance he could win 27-23 because of how well Republicans did this past election. But if people say, oh, Republicans, you just want to do this because you lost. No. I want you to defend the principle of a free and fair election. My God, the United States, the federal government tries to set up free and fair elections all over the world. And you're saying we're not going to be able to have a free and fair election in the United States for president? That's insane. That's insane. So we have to have a free and fair election. The world is watching what we do. And if this election, the attempt was made to steal it, in my lifetime, I've never heard of something like this Dominion software, where you use it and you can monitor voting in seconds, like a clock ticking, as they say, in real time. If that went on, and 30 states apparently use this Dominion software, if that went on, then we have a problem. And if I'm the US Supreme Court again, I'm saying all of this assuming that 5 justices are offended by the thought that an American election for president could be stolen. Now, they have several constitutional grounds to do something about it. Equal protection. Remember we've talked about it. We're going to talk about it some more in the 14th Amendment. You can't say votes of people in Pennsylvania that counted 3 or 4 times because they're fake ballots get to be counted over voters in Louisiana. We only get 1 vote in Louisiana. They're only supposed to get 1 vote in Pennsylvania. But if, because they put in fraudulent ballots, hundreds of them, that means some votes counted 3 or 4 times more in Pennsylvania than they do in Louisiana. That is an equal protection problem. You can't treat some states differently than other states. It's also a substantive due process problem. The right to vote is fundamental. And I want to tell you just a little bit about that. So let me finish. If it goes into the Senate, the House, Lord, let me be clear about that, the House, I think Republicans are going to win for the second time. Feel free to say that too. I think we've already won. I just think it's being stolen. But if this keeps going, I think President, let me get that out of my vocabulary. I think Joe Biden's best day is going to look, in hindsight, it's going to be when all the media came, including Fox News, which I'm finished with, when they all came together and said Biden is the president-elect with so much in dispute. They did that because they want him to be. They hate President Trump. They want him so badly to be defeated. They want to do everything they can to create the appearance that it's over. Biden is the president-elect. No, he's not. The media controls nothing. Nothing. The media makes no legal difference. It certainly makes no constitutional difference. It just confuses people. But it's not over till the Supreme Court says it is. And I don't think it's going to be thrown into the House of Representatives. But if it gets too mushed up and too hard to tell good ballots from bad ballots, even in Georgia, the quote unquote recount right now, I don't think observers are even being used. And if they're being used, they're still not close enough to watch. And the way the ballots are being done, they're not even making sure an envelope has to be alongside the ballot itself. The reason I say these things is because they have legal significance. In some of these states, ballots are considered public documents, government documents. You've got to keep them. In fact, it's a crime if you destroy one. So that's why both the envelope the ballot came in and the ballot itself have to be kept. Otherwise, you can't tell if it was signed, sealed, stamped, everything, and delivered the way it's supposed to be. At a certain point, the Supreme Court, if they hear the case, is going to say, there's no way this court can tell. The corruption is so widespread, there's no principled way, no formula we can use to determine who won this election. Because of that, we're declaring those states that are suspect to have invalid ballots, which means no candidate gets to 270, which throws it into the House of Representatives. Then no one can say the Supreme Court decided the election. No, they didn't. All they did was say, we're not allowing these ballots to be certified. We're going to send it into the people's house. The U.S. House of Representatives is the people's house. They get elected every 2 years. They're closer to the population. That's all by design. That's the way their framers wanted it. The U.S. Senate has 6-year terms. More deliberative, move more slowly. They said the cup is where you pour it. The cup is the House of Representatives. The tea boils and boils in the cup and spills over into the saucer. And the saucer is the U.S. Senate, where it cools off. Things settle down. It's a more deliberative body. So those are thoughts about what is going on right now. Now, I want to tell you a little bit. It's always the liberals who are screaming about y'all trying to take away the right to vote. You're trying to suppress the right to vote. It's I can tell you the right to vote is preservative of every other right. I'm going to say that again. The U.S. Supreme Court has held that the right to vote is a fundamental right because it is preservative of every other right. You know, it's like the right to life, liberty, and property. The reason the right to life comes first is because without the right to life, every other right is meaningless. If you don't have the right to be born, then you'll never need any other rights because you'll never be a human being on the earth. Same thing here. Without the fundamental right to vote, not being stolen, not being completely, well, whatever's going on right now, I've described it. With one person is supposed to have one vote. That's it. They're supposed to be equal across the United States. The right to vote is preservative. It preserves every other right. And I would just say, does this look like an honest election to you? We all have common sense. Does this look like an honest election to you? It doesn't to me. But you can certainly disagree. But keep in mind that the fundamental right to vote is also a sacred right possessed by the 73 million Americans who voted for President Trump. Their right to vote is sacred also. Their right to vote is fundamental also. So that is why we're fighting over this. And we know, I've told you before, this right to vote is found in a number of places. We're going to talk about the 9th Amendment, 10th Amendment, but it's lodged in what's called fundamental. It's a fundamental right because it's lodged in substantive due process. We have procedural due process and substantive due process, and the right to vote is found in substantive due process. It's also located in different rights for different groups of people over our nation's history in the 15th, 19th, 24th, and 26th Amendments. And again, both the substantive due process and equal protection protected the right to vote, as well as the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, as well as something called 42 U.S.C. Section 1983. They all protect, in one way or another, the fundamental right to vote, and that includes the 73 million people, Americans, who voted for President Trump. Their votes are just as sacred and deserve to be protected just as much as the votes of Joe Biden. But you tell me if you think it looks like it's been done legitimately. Is it legitimate when state law in many states requires that election monitors from both parties, they're not allowed to interfere? Like if I'm sitting here at my desk counting votes, they can't interfere, but they can stand 3 feet away and 3 feet away and look and say, could I see that ballot again? Where's the envelope that comes with that ballot? They're keeping them either out of the building entirely or 50 feet away. You can't see anything 50 feet away. A lot of stuff, just you can't tell if a signature matches in one place or another 50 feet away. But that's what a lot of these states are doing. They're not allowing Republican election monitors to be close enough to see. That's illegitimate. It's illegal because state law requires that these here registrar voters, states call them different things, the Commonwealth Secretary of Voting, whatever, they have to allow Trump election monitors to be there to watch. By law, they have to, and they're not doing that. That's one huge problem. You've seen on TV in Detroit, they don't even let them inside the building. Then they put up boards or boxes to block windows so they couldn't even look in through the window. I promise you, you can't hardly see anything through a window anyway. Now they're blocking the window itself. Illegal, corrupt. That is the definition of corruption. If you don't have anything to hide, why won't you let people come and look? Because you do have something to hide. You do have something to hide. So not letting them monitor the election. You send people home about midnight. Y'all going home. We're done counting for today. That's not why they sent them home. If you look in how Dominion This Dominion software was used in other countries like Venezuela to re-elect tyrant dictators like Hugo Chavez. They also send the people home at midnight because that's when they decide how many votes they need to make up. That's how the software is used. Since when do we stop counting during a presidential election? We don't stop counting. That's highly suspicious. It's not only highly suspicious, but it's even more suspicious when the next morning people come in and sometime during the night, 120,000 ballots came in. Where did they come in from? Why do they all just have Joe Biden's name? They didn't even vote for any other candidate. Ladies and gentlemen, even in a highly Democrat area, very blue area, or very red area, people make mistakes. People accidentally vote for the candidate they don't intend to vote for. You're telling me out of 120,000 ballots, nobody made a mistake. No one accidentally voted for President Trump. Of course they did. That happens every time. That's why in a precinct, maybe 200 people will have voted for, if it's a Democrat precinct, for the Democrat candidate, but 15 or 16 will have voted for the other person. Many of them accidentally, or maybe a few actually intended to. But when you have no votes for the other person, that's because they're lying. It's fabricated. They need every vote because they don't know how many votes they need. That's why they hold them out and hold them out and hold them out, because they want to see what the other networks are saying, what the news is saying. Oh, President Trump is ahead this much, because then they know they got to go find that many votes to make up the difference. Cheating. And that's what something like Dominion software will allow them to do. So you tell me if you think it's strange that they get sent home at midnight. I understand people get tired. You're saying your county or your parish can't hire a few more people to keep counting all night long. It's none of it. It just doesn't ring true. This is not just Royal, the Trump supporter. You tell me if this makes sense to you. How do 120,000 ballots just roll up in the middle of the night? They all voted for Biden. I wonder where they came from. It's unavailing, as they say in the law. All of these facts, when you try to say we've had an honest election, they're unavailing. It's untrue. What else? Over a 20-hour period, people were forced to stand back and not allowed to count. What about ballots? One worker, and these people are signing affidavits. These hundreds of affidavits I've told you that have been signed, they've been signed by people who were in a position to know, not just some Joe walking down the street. Oh, what's your opinion? Do you think that was cheating? Would you sign this affidavit? These are people, many of whom were counting ballots or who worked around there. They're swearing under oath, because again, that's what an affidavit is, that they have knowledge that something fraudulent was done. It's a conspiracy. That word gets thrown around, but this much organization requires a lot of people working together to steal it. Now, what about ballots being backdated? You know, they didn't arrive in time. Got to say that they arrived in time because we got to count them. What about, again, statisticians, analysis, demographers would say it is highly statistically improbable, highly statistically improbable for thousands, tens of thousands, 100,000 in Wisconsin ballots to show up, and everyone have voted for one person. No mistakes were made. It doesn't happen. People get confused or distracted and they vote for it. Always happens because we're human beings. We're not machines. We're flawed. We make mistakes. And out of 100,000 ballots, not one of them made a mistake and voted for Trump or forgot to vote for Biden. By the way, they just voted for Biden. They didn't go down the list and vote for any other candidates for any other elections in that state. That's also highly suspicious. Every now and then people will skip a race. You know, I don't really know about that amendment, or I don't know about these candidates, so I'm just going to skip this amendment or those candidates. But I'm going to go keep voting on down my ballot. No, showed up in the middle of the night, 100,000, only voted for one race, president, and only voted for Biden. Life just doesn't work like that. It strains credulity. Let me see what else. And now the glitch. The glitch, that's what I meant to mention. The glitch, the computer glitch. A computer glitch. Computers don't glitch. Computers are machines, and they do what you tell them to do. They do what they are programmed to do. They don't go wander around and make mistakes. They do what they're told. A computer glitch. No, it was intended. The only glitch here is that y'all got caught. Anyway, moving on. We're going to hear more about Dominion. Okay, those are the things that I wanted to tell you. The deadlines, December 8th is the safe harbor. December 14th is when electors are required to meet in their state capitals and cast their ballots. Then the governor is supposed to certify that. Each state must certify the state's presidential election. And by no later than the 23rd of December, they got to be transmitted to the Congress. So a lot can happen, but that's what the Constitution says is supposed to happen. All right. I know that took a while, but I needed you to understand those things because that's what's going on. It's in real time. We're living life based on the Constitution. As things go now, this election is going to be decided by our Constitution. It's going to either be decided because the U.S. Supreme Court says, no, we're going to count the votes in every state, but the corrupt ones, the ones we find the cheating, that we can no longer figure out it's so mixed up now. There's no way we can know what ballot arrived on time and what came in late. So we're just not counting any of your electoral votes. So we're knocking this state out, this state, this state, this state, which means, unfortunately, neither candidate got to 270 electoral votes. So it's going to the House of Representatives. That's all straight out of this Constitution. So this is the reason we're even doing this class at all. Well, I hope you always tune in because our Constitution is so relevant right now. Talk about real time. I know the Trump campaign is working overtime. They've got great lawyers, and I've contributed. And if they ask for us to contribute, we've got to have a fair election. If we lost, then we'll take it. But beat us truthfully because we love our country and our vote is supposed to count just like all the illegal votes. Our votes, we have a sacred right to vote also. Our 73 million votes for Trump are sacred also. So we've got to get to the bottom of this. I'm grateful we have a Supreme Court. To me, I see 2 or 3 solid grounds. One of them is that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court cannot change Pennsylvania law that emanated from the legislature to say, you know what, we know best. We're going to add more days to the date ballots can be accepted. No, you can't. And I've looked at it so many times. Let's assume it's 3 days, November 3rd, 3 days on is state law. The Supreme Court can't come in and say, from November 6th, we're just going to add another 6 days and make it November 12th. You can't do that, Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. That is a clear, strict construction, textualist view. Remember we talked about textualism. What does the words of the Pennsylvania state statute say? No ballot collected after 8 o'clock on the 3rd. It doesn't really matter the exact point. My point is that you understand this. That's state law. In Pennsylvania, we're not counting ballots after 8 o'clock on election day, November 3rd. Nothing else. That means Pennsylvania Supreme Court, you can't roll in and say, we're the Supreme Court. We know best. We're smart. We're going to say you have a constitutional right to more days to get the ballots in. No, you don't. They have created a clear violation of their power, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, and they've given the U.S. Supreme Court a clear opening to come in and say, no, you can't do that, Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And once they go into Pennsylvania and do that, what they rule is going to apply to all the other states. So I know that's a lot, but there's a lot going on, and it pertains to the Constitution. It pertains to so much that we've already been through and so much we're still going to go through. But keep those things in mind, please. This thing is not over. When people say, oh, no, President-elect, oh, it's hard for me not to use a profanity. The media does not decide who the president is or when we have a president-elect. They don't. When Obama won, of course, now that I think about Dominion voting, it makes me double rethink that. But Obama's margins were really strong margins. A ton of people who don't typically vote for the Democrat voted for Barack Obama. Part of that was because John McCain was an uninspiring presidential candidate. But whatever the case may be, Obama won overwhelmingly. That's the way I think President Trump won this time. But keep in mind what Joseph Stalin said, the preeminent communist of all time. What did Stalin say? He alone, as chairman of the Soviet Union, president of the Soviet Union, said that it's not the votes that count, it's he who counts the votes that matters. The votes don't matter. He who counts the votes matter. That's scary. That's what we have here. The votes don't matter, he says. It's he who counts the votes that matters. Joseph Stalin, the preeminent communist of all time. So that's scary. We can't have that in this country, and we're not. We've got to get to the bottom of it. I know the Supreme Court is watching this, and there's so much here for it to choose to say no. There's straight up federal statutory violations, state statutory violations, what I just said about Pennsylvania law, the deadline. But there are constitutional issues here. Equal protection. You can't say Pennsylvania voters, illegal voters, count 3 times what a Louisiana vote. You can't deprive the fundamental right to vote of people in Louisiana versus people in Pennsylvania or Wisconsin. Votes in Wisconsin can't be worth more than 1 vote than they are in Louisiana. So, in my view, the Supreme Court has grounds to go and fix this. I know it's not over. This is a stressful time period, but let's not lose hope. I had to tell you all that. It's important. It's highly relevant to me, and I want this class to be highly relevant to you. So please keep things in mind. A lot of this is fluid. I mean, my analysis changes as I get more facts, but the framework I've laid out to you in these, I cannot believe how fast the time goes. I was going to say the last 40 minutes. We've been doing this 52 minutes already. What I've laid out for you in the last 50 minutes is the framework that will decide this election. If something changes, then my analysis will be slightly different. But what I've said about the view of the U.S. Supreme Court, about what I think is going on in several of these states, about straining credulity, how highly suspicious this all looks, how you violate state law by not allowing monitors to come and look. And people say, oh, Royal, you're just being partisan. Well, I promise you, if the shoe was on the other foot, the other side would be making the exact same arguments I'm making based upon the same constitutional provisions I'm referring to, based upon the same Pennsylvania state law. If a Republican majority was on the Pennsylvania state, was in Pennsylvania, Republican Supreme Court, and they had told the Democrat legislature, no, we're going to let ballots count another week, the Democrats would be making the same argument I'm making, that Pennsylvania Republican Supreme Court, you don't get to extend the days past the deadline that your state law sets. You don't get to do that. They'd be making the same argument. So I'm not partisan. I am constitutional. I mean, I do support President Trump, but these arguments are based on the Constitution, not on my opinion. I mean, honestly. So that is the things I wanted to tell you. Let's talk briefly about the 9th Amendment. The 9th Amendment, and then after this is the 10th Amendment, which is a powerful one. And I may talk about it for a second. The 9th Amendment, it's one that's not as well known, but it's powerfully important. Why? It says the enumeration, keep in mind, the federal government's powers aren't supposed to be enumerated. You only get to have those powers that are explicitly enumerated. The 9th Amendment says the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage other rights retained by the people. So that's because the framers were still worried we haven't limited this federal government enough. If they could see what it is today, they'd say, my God, we definitely did not limit it enough. But the 9th they're saying, we know we've just told you in these first eight amendments, the Bill of Rights, freedom of speech, right to keep and bear arms. You can't put troops in homes. Fourth Amendment, unreasonable searches and seizures. Fifth Amendment, due process. The eminent domain, all those powers. Those criminal defense powers I told you about. The fourth, fifth, sixth. Right to attorney. The seventh, a little bit less so, Eighth Amendment, cruel and unusual punishment. Now we've set all those rights, we've laid them out in those first Eighth Amendments. And we're telling you here in the Ninth Amendment that just because we didn't mention it, doesn't mean the people don't still have those rights. That's what the Ninth Amendment means. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage any other rights retained by the people. So just because we don't have a piece of paper long enough to write every single right down, and we didn't try to do that here, we the drafters, don't think just because we didn't list it doesn't mean the people still don't possess that power, because the only powers this federal government possesses are the ones we did list specifically. We enumerated expressly. The power to tax, keep and bear arms, freedom of speech, free exercise of religion, the freedom to peaceably assemble to petition the government for a redress of grievances, the Establishment Clause, all of which only means no state religion. Other than that, our worship, our faith is supposed to be a part of public life. Anyway, we already did all that in the First Amendment, and I know you remember that. And if you don't, please go back and look at that lecture. But the Ninth Amendment just means, in case we haven't made it clear enough to you in the first 8, we're saying yet again here in the Ninth Amendment, just because we didn't specifically list it, like free exercise, like the right to keep and bear arms, like the quartering of troops in people's homes, like unreasonable searches and seizures, or warrants, or probable cause, just because we didn't specifically list it like those principles that we did specifically list, does not mean that the people still don't retain those rights, because they do. That's what the Ninth Amendment means, and it's terribly important, powerfully important, just like the 10th Amendment is. The Ninth Amendment is a constitutional safety net intended to make clear that individuals have other fundamental rights in addition to those listed in the First through Eighth Amendment. The framers, again, were concerned that because it was impossible to list every fundamental right, I mean, the Constitution would be hundreds of pages long, because they couldn't list, practically speaking, every one of our rights, they wanted to make the point clear yet again. Every presumption is that on rights we didn't mention specifically, every presumption is that on rights we did not mention specifically are retained by the people, not by the federal government, because the only rights you have, federal government, are the ones we have expressly, specifically laid out and enumerated. All right, we are just about at the end. I will do the 10th Amendment, but don't forget the 9th Amendment. It's one that it's overlooked, but brother, it is in there and it is strong. It's like they were worried, Madison, they were worried, you know, we've assured the states that they're still going to be the prominent power, not this new central federal government that we bracketed and limited. At least they thought they had bracketed and limited it. You can look today and see if the federal government looks bracketed and limited. They wouldn't recognize it. Like you've heard me say that in our other lectures. What I'm saying is the 9th Amendment's there, them saying one more time, just in case we have not been crystal clear about what we're doing here with these first 10 amendments, well, with the articles themselves. But in these first 8, we've laid it out as clearly as we can. Now we're in the 9th, and we're telling you yet again that just because we cannot practically, feasibly lay every single fundamental right out, just because we didn't say its name specifically here, like we did in these first 8, doesn't mean the people still don't have those rights, because they do still retain those rights. And again, the federal government, you're still limited to just those powers we've expressly given you and none others. And if you want more power, then you're going to need to amend the Constitution to have them given to you by the people, or at least by the Congress. Well, it is 7 o'clock, and we will do the 10th Amendment next time. But please don't forget about the 9th Amendment. I want you to think about it like I do. There they are in that room in Philadelphia. Those 5 months in that sweltering summer, I've told you before, they kept the doors and windows closed because they couldn't have someone listening to go and say, oh, they're not revising the Articles of Confederation in there. They're actually writing a constitution. And then there'd be opposition to it before they ever finished. So it was closed off, that building. No air conditioning, sweltering hot in those heavy clothes they wore. They didn't trust each other. The big states didn't trust the small states. These were real human beings who were frustrated. They had their own prejudices and biases and vices. But I think God had his hand on them. There they are in that hot room. Here they are. They finished the 8th. And they're arguing because many of them think, maybe we haven't made it clear enough. Maybe we need to put this 9th Amendment in there to say yet again. And the big state said, oh, no, we don't need to limit it anymore. You know, we're not basically afraid of a big government, big federal government. But the framers were like, no, no, no. And they had to compromise. And this 9th Amendment was the compromise. We're telling you, just in case the first 7 articles, which we've already been through, and these first 8 amendments, which we've now been through, because we're now at the 9th Amendment, just in case we haven't made it clear to stand for all time, it's written right here in the 9th Amendment that the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights, and we've spelled them out as well as we can without running into hundreds of pages, shall not be construed to mean that any we did not mention don't belong to the people, because they do belong to the people. And only the ones we've specifically given the federal government belong to them. I know I've said that 3 times because it's important and I want you to remember it. Now, let me see if there's any questions real quick. 7:02, I made pretty good time tonight. I'm sorry we didn't get to the 10th, but please don't forget about the 9th Amendment. It's one of the ones that's almost never mentioned. Just even if you don't remember the principle behind it, that just because the framers couldn't, practically speaking, sit and write for days every single right, because I mean, there'll always be one more to add. And then people would say, oh, we've looked through the whole list of hundreds. It's not in there. You don't have it. No, they covered it here. With the 9th, they said, just because we didn't have a chance or take the time to write hundreds of pages of this Constitution, which we're not even supposed to be writing anyway, we're supposed to be revising the Articles of Confederation here in this hot room with people we don't really like. They're arrogant. Everybody thinks they're smart, dipping tobacco in that heat, not trusting each other. It's a miracle it ever happened. It's a miracle. And I think it couldn't have happened but God ordaining those men, the Holy Spirit, George Washington sitting there for months, not contributing anything significantly from a legal standpoint, but adding so much moral authority sitting in that hot room. You know, he didn't want to be there. He wanted to be on his farm in that hot room with these egos who don't trust each other. They weren't even supposed to be in there doing that. They were supposed to be revising the articles. So don't forget the 9th. This is the principle. Just because the Constitution doesn't expressly grant it, doesn't mean we, the people in Louisiana, the people in Texas, the people in Nebraska, New Jersey, the 50 states, all of the people, because remember, power, all legitimate authority, well, first it derives from God in natural law, but it is by our birth and by our intrinsic value and our intrinsic inherent right to self-government, wherein we set up governments, as Jefferson laid out in the Declaration of Independence. We set up those governments, which are supposed to put into place these principles, those unalienable rights. Well, that right, these rights flow ultimately, legitimately from God through natural law to his creation, the people, and up from the people to the government we elect. So the 9th Amendment says we may not have listed it, but you still retain these rights. So anyway, here's a question. Good question. Ninth Amendment. Mr. Alexander, why is the Ninth Amendment not used more often, and why is the 10th Amendment cited more often? That's a great question. That looks like that question is from somebody listening in Biloxi. I want you to know my sister and her family live in Bay St. Louis. So our Biloxi listener tonight, just know that Rachel Alexander Rimmer and her 7 children are a few miles from you. And I hope, Rachel, by the way, I hope you're listening, or your children are listening tonight. Love you. That is a great question. The 10th Amendment, well, we're not doing the 10th Amendment right now because it requires more. The 10th Amendment says clearly, it's similar. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states and to the people. What that means is, and we're going to tear that apart in the 10th Amendment next time. It just means, again, it's just like the 9th Amendment. In case we haven't been clear, with these first 9 amendments, now we're saying in the 10th that those powers not delegated specifically to the federal government, enumerated, are reserved to the states and the people. It's the strongest states' rights argument that there is. There's plenty of other places in the Constitution that protect what we call our system of co-federalism, where the federal government and the states are equal powers. You might say, sure, it doesn't look like that. Sure looks like the federal government is way more powerful than the states. And it does look like that. And that's illegitimate. That's unconstitutional. It's not supposed to be that way. The federal government and the 50 states are co-equal powers. There's no question about that. The fact that it's not followed is the problem. The 10th Amendment is just saying, again, in case we haven't been clear to you people, future generations who love big government. We just told you in the 9th about the people still retaining all the rights. Now we're telling you, again, in a slightly different way, that those powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, that means they're not enumerated. We didn't give you any powers, or prohibited by the Constitution to the states, which is not the issue, are reserved to the people, to the states and to the people. So it's I can't say, and we're going to do the 10th separately, but the 9th and the 10th are powerful arguments for the right that the people in the 9th retain every right that's not specifically given. We retain those rights. We just can't list them all. It's too hard to list hundreds or thousands of individual rights. So we're telling you, because we know we can't list them all, don't think that because we didn't list them, the people still don't have them, because they do. The 10th Amendment saying, no way. Here are the states, the 50 states, pushing back on the federal government, saying, no, federal government, you're limited to your specifically enumerated powers. Everything else is left to us. So back the hell off. Anyway, that is a great question from Biloxi. I don't see any other questions, and I hope you'll remember what we said tonight. And what we're doing is so relevant, so relevant. It's always relevant anyway, but right now it is relevant in real time as we watch this presidential election unfold. It's all based on our Constitution, and you're going to already know it. So when you hear stupid things, or let's just say, my mother would say, I need to be more charitable. So let's say, when you hear things that are ignorant, I hope you'll correct them. Affidavits are evidence. We're gathering it. It's coming. The news media doesn't have the power to declare anything but their own wishes and hopes. It has no legal or constitutional significance what the media says, and there's no such thing as the office of the president-elect. So keep the faith, and I will see you in 2 weeks, and thank you for being here tonight.